The kitchen smelled faintly of cinnamon and freshly brewed coffee, a scent that always anchored me in moments of calm and purpose. I was carefully folding a hand-knit sweater, a surprise for my grandson, when the sudden vibration of my phone shattered the morning stillness. It was a message from Emma, my daughter-in-law, and the words hit me like a cold gust of winter wind. "Stop visiting us. You're embarrassing." The bluntness of the text left a hollow ache in my chest, as though years of quiet devotion and love had been dismissed with a few cruel strokes of a keyboard. I sat down at the edge of the worn oak table, my fingers trembling slightly as I reread the message, searching for some hint of misunderstanding or a hidden kindness that wasn't there. But it was clear: Emma wanted me gone. The woman who had once welcomed me into her home with a smile now saw me as a burden, a source of shame to be swept away. I thought of my son David, caught between his wife's sharp words and the mother who had stood by him through every hardship. The weight of rejection pressed down on me, but I forced myself to breathe deeply, to respond with neither anger nor tears. Sometimes silence is the loudest answer. Memories flooded back, bittersweet and sharp. I remembered the countless afternoons spent baking cookies for family gatherings, the nights I stayed up knitting scarves to keep little hands warm during winter, the quiet support I offered when David faced layoffs and Emma battled illness. I had never sought praise or thanks. My love was a steady undercurrent beneath their lives, unspoken but unwavering. Yet here I was, told that my presence was a source of embarrassment, as if my efforts had been invisible all along. That evening, I sat alone in my favorite armchair, the soft glow of the lamp casting long shadows on the walls. I reached for the leather-bound journal I'd kept for years, a ledger of silent sacrifices and acts of kindness that no one had ever asked about but that I'd chronicled faithfully. Every time I helped with a hospital bill, every birthday gift given in secret, every moment I'd stepped in to fill a void, I had written it down, believing that someday my family might understand the quiet love I had poured into their lives. With a trembling hand, I flipped through the pages, each entry a testament to my devotion. Yet, as I closed the journal one final time, a strange calm settled over me. I placed it on the fireplace hearth and without hesitation set it aflame. Watching the fire consume the pages felt like releasing a burden I no longer wished to carry, the burden of unreciprocated love and invisible sacrifices. Emma's words echoed in my mind, but I refused to let them define me. I would walk away with dignity, not bitterness. The next morning, I packed a small bag, choosing to leave before the daylight caught me lingering. I didn't call or send another message. There was no need. I had given them all I could, and now it was time to protect myself from further wounds. As I closed the door behind me, I felt the sting of loss, but also the first flicker of freedom. Life's chapters close, not always with applause, but sometimes with quiet resolve. In the days that followed, I reflected on the subtle signs I had missed. The cold glances from Emma during family dinners, the curt replies to my offers of help, the way David's eyes would flicker with discomfort when I spoke up. It was as if an invisible wall had grown between us, brick by brick, until I was no longer a cherished presence but a source of shame to be hidden away. The realization settled heavily in my heart: my love alone was not enough to bridge the growing chasm. Yet, even as I grieved the loss of connection, I refused to let bitterness take root. I poured myself into new routines, rediscovering old hobbies and reaching out to friends who had stood by me through thick and thin. The world beyond their doorstep was vast, and though the ache of rejection lingered, I embraced the promise of new beginnings. The story of my family's fracture was not mine to rewrite, but the story of my healing was mine alone. One afternoon, a quiet knock at my door startled me. It was Sophie, my granddaughter, her eyes wide with confusion and sadness. "Grandma, will you come back?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I held her close, the warmth of her small body a balm to my wounded heart. "I love you, Sophie," I whispered, "and I'm always here for you, but sometimes even love can't fix everything right away." She nodded, trusting the truth in my words more than I expected. That night, I sat by the window watching the city lights flicker against the dark sky. The hurt was still there, raw and real, but beneath it a quiet strength was growing. I had learned that love must be met with respect, that kindness cannot thrive where it is not valued. And though the path ahead was uncertain, I was ready to walk it with my head held high. In the silence, I found clarity. I would no longer allow myself to be a shadow in someone else's life, invisible and unappreciated. I would protect my heart and cherish the relationships that honored the love I gave. The journey was just beginning, and I was determined to face it with grace and courage, whatever storms might come. The memory of that earlier visit still haunted me, the day when Emma's smile had been a thin veil barely concealing something colder, something distant. I had arrived, arms full of homemade bread and the knitted sweater for Sophie, expecting the warmth of family. Instead, I was met with curt nods and sideways glances. Emma barely looked at me, her words clipped as she dismissed my offer to help with the household chores. "We've got it covered, thanks," she said, her tone polite but sharp. David, usually my son of gentle humor and warmth, seemed uncomfortable, his eyes flickering away as if avoiding a confrontation he didn't want to have. I remember standing there, the bread cradled awkwardly in my hands, feeling an unfamiliar chill settle in the room. It was the first time I sensed that my presence was no longer wanted, not just by Emma, but by the very family I had nurtured for so long. The realization sank slowly, like a stone sinking in still water. I was no longer a cherished grandmother, but an inconvenient echo from a past they wished to forget. In the days that followed, I replayed that visit in my mind, searching for clues I had missed. The subtle avoidance of eye contact, the forced politeness, the way Emma's laughter never quite reached her eyes. I understood then that my love, no matter how steadfast, was not enough to bridge the growing divide. Every gesture of kindness, every small sacrifice I had made, was now seen through a lens of resentment and embarrassment. It was as if my devotion had become a shadow, something to be hidden rather than celebrated. David's distance was the hardest to bear. He had always been my anchor, the son who shared my love for quiet mornings and family traditions. But since Emma entered our lives, he had changed, his smiles less frequent, his voice more guarded. I knew he was torn, caught between loyalty to his wife and the mother who had raised him. Yet I also sensed his reluctance to stand up for me, his silence a quiet acquiescence to Emma's growing control. One afternoon, I received a message from David that was short and conflicted. "Mom, can we talk? Things have been complicated." The words were a fragile thread, a tentative reach in the fog of misunderstanding, but when I tried to call, he didn't answer. Instead, the silence deepened, thickening the distance between us. Emma's influence was unmistakable. She seemed determined to redraw the boundaries of our family, pushing me further into the shadows. Invitations to gatherings became fewer, excuses more frequent. When I offered help with Sophie's school projects or suggested family outings, my efforts were met with polite refusals or ignored altogether. It was a slow erasure, a quiet exile that left me feeling invisible in the home I once called my own. Yet, even in the face of rejection, I held on to the hope that things might change, that David might find the courage to bridge the gap. But as weeks turned into months, my hope waned. The messages I sent went unanswered, the phone calls unanswered. The family I had nurtured was slipping through my fingers, and I was powerless to stop it. In the quiet of my living room, I sat surrounded by photographs, snapshots of birthdays, holidays, and simple moments filled with laughter. Each picture was a reminder of a time when love was enough to hold us together. Now those images felt like relics from another life, a past that no longer belonged to me. I made a decision then, a painful but necessary choice, to cease all visits and emotional outreach. To protect my heart from further wounds, I would step back, let the silence grow, and see what might bloom from the stillness. It was not a surrender but a boundary, a way to reclaim my dignity in a situation that had stripped it away. The response was swift and confusing. David's messages shifted from confusion to pleading, from concern to frustration. "Why won't you answer?" he asked. "We miss you, Mom." Emma's texts were sterner, more insistent. Please stop contacting us. We need space. The conflicting voices pulled at me, each message a tug on the fraying threads of family. But I remained silent, choosing to listen to the quiet voice within that urged me to hold firm. The love I bore was not a leash to be tugged at by others' whims. It was a steady flame that needed respect, not control. During one particularly lonely evening, I found myself drafting a letter not to send, but to pour out the years of hurt and hope that had accumulated in my heart. I wrote of the sacrifices made in silence, the nights spent worrying over David's struggles, the joy of watching Sophie grow. I wrote of the pain of rejection and the longing for a relationship built on mutual respect rather than obligation. The words flowed like a river, cleansing and raw, a testament to a love that refused to be extinguished. As the days passed, I noticed subtle shifts. Relatives who had once been distant began to reach out, their voices tinged with concern and curiosity. At a family gathering, the absence of my presence was palpable, a quiet question hanging in the air, a tension beneath the surface. Conversations skirted around the subject, but the undercurrent was clear. Something had changed, and not for the better. Yet, despite the whispers and the stirrings of regret, I held fast to my resolve. I would no longer allow myself to be a shadow in their lives, an uninvited ghost haunting the edges of family. My love was not conditional on acceptance, but my presence was a choice, one that required respect and kindness. In the solitude of my home, surrounded by memories and unanswered messages, I began to rebuild. I found solace in old friends who remembered me as I was, not as I had been cast aside. I took up painting again, the brush strokes a balm for my weary soul. I learned to find joy in my own company, to nurture the parts of myself that had been neglected in the pursuit of family harmony. And through it all, I held on to the hope that one day the walls built by fear and misunderstanding might crumble, that David would see the mother he once knew beneath the hurt and distance, that Sophie would understand the love that had never wavered even when the world seemed cold. But until that day, I would protect my heart with quiet strength, embracing the painful truth that sometimes love is not enough to hold a family together. Sometimes healing begins in the space left by silence. The phone remained silent, its screen dark despite the flurry of calls and texts I knew were pouring in from David. Each unanswered ring was a deliberate choice. I was no longer willing to be the bridge mended and broken at their convenience. The tension that had been simmering beneath the surface erupted into a quiet stand of dignity, a refusal to engage in conversations that led nowhere but deeper into hurt. David's messages grew more desperate, threading through the silence like fragile lifelines. "Please, Mom, just talk to me," one read. "We need to figure this out." But I held firm, knowing that words without respect were empty echoes. I was tired of being the one to reach out, to soften the edges of their rejection. Now it was time for them to meet me halfway, or not at all. In the solitude of my study, I poured my feelings into a letter I never intended to send. The ink traced years of support, quiet sacrifices, and unwavering love that had been met with coldness and distance. I wrote of the nights I stayed awake worrying about David's future, the moments I stepped in to help when no one else would, and the warmth I had tried to bring into their lives. But most of all, I wrote of the pain, the raw ache of being unseen and unappreciated by those I held dearest. The letter was not a plea for reconciliation, it was a declaration of my worth and a demand for respect. I folded it carefully, placing it in an envelope addressed simply to David, a symbol of truth laid bare without rancor or accusation. Weeks passed and a family gathering was scheduled, a rare occasion that once brought joy and laughter. This time, my absence was a conspicuous silence amid the clinking of glasses and forced smiles. Relatives exchanged glances, their hushed conversations tinged with curiosity and unease. It was clear that the fracture in our family had become a subject whispered behind closed doors. At the gathering, I imagined the conversations that might be unfolding. I pictured David's discomfort, Emma's sharp retorts, and the strained attempts to maintain appearances. The thought was bittersweet. My absence had not gone unnoticed, but whether it would inspire reflection or resentment remained uncertain. One evening, I received a voicemail from David. His voice was thick with emotion, a fragile mixture of regret and confusion. "Mom, I don't know what went wrong. I miss you. Please, let's find a way back." I listened to the message 3 times, each replay chipping away at the walls I had built around my heart, yet I remained resolute. My silence was not punishment but protection, a boundary drawn to preserve my dignity. In the quiet that followed, I contemplated the nature of love and respect. I realized that love without respect is a fragile thing, vulnerable to being taken for granted and worn thin by neglect. My decision to step back was not a retreat but a stand, a way to teach that love must be honored, not assumed. Days later, I drafted a heartfelt letter to David, different from the first. This one was a bridge, an invitation to honesty and healing. I recounted the years I had supported them, not out of obligation but from love. I expressed my pain at feeling sidelined and my hope that we could rebuild a relationship founded on mutual respect. The letter was clear: I was willing to forgive but not to be forgotten or dismissed. I sent the letter with a cautious hope, understanding that healing is a journey, not an instant. In the meantime, I focused on nurturing myself, reconnecting with old friends, exploring new hobbies, and finding solace in the rhythms of my own life. The act of caring for myself was both a balm and a declaration that my worth was not dependent on others' approval. As weeks turned to months, the silence between David and me began to soften. His messages became less frequent but more thoughtful. He acknowledged his passivity and expressed a desire to mend what had been broken. Though wary, I recognized the first steps toward reconciliation. Yet, Emma's shadow still loomed. Her messages to me were terse and tinged with frustration, a reminder that the path to healing would not be smooth. The family dynamics were complicated, tangled in years of unspoken grievances and shifting loyalties. Still, I held to my boundaries. I refused to be drawn into conflicts or to finance battles that were not mine to fight. My love was steady but not blind. It demanded respect and honesty in return. One afternoon, I received a message from a distant cousin who had attended the family gathering. They told me that my absence had sparked conversations about Emma and David's behavior, that relatives were beginning to question the narrative I had been excluded from. It was a small victory, a sign that silence can speak louder than words. Throughout this time, I found strength in solitude and clarity in reflection. I learned that stepping back does not mean giving up. It means choosing self-respect over suffering and teaching those we love that boundaries are essential to healthy relationships. The journey was far from over, but the path was beginning to take shape. Each day I reclaimed a piece of myself, rebuilding not just my life but the foundation for a future where love is met with respect and kindness is not taken for granted. In the quiet moments, I held on to hope that one day David and I could sit together without the weight of resentment, that Sophie would know the full measure of a grandmother's love, and that Emma might learn the value of compassion. Until then, I remained steadfast, a beacon of strength and grace amid the storm. The letter arrived on a cool spring morning, its familiar handwriting stirring a mixture of hope and apprehension within me. Carefully, I broke the seal and unfolded the pages, each word etched with a sincerity that caught me off guard. David's apology was heartfelt, a rare admission of the pain caused by Emma's rejection and his own silence. He wrote of regret for letting the distance grow, for failing to stand up when it mattered most, and a genuine desire to rebuild the fractured bonds of our family. His words were a balm to the wounds I had carried silently, a bridge extending through the chasm that had formed between us. Yet, beneath the relief, I felt a cautious reserve. Years of neglect do not vanish with a single apology. Healing would require time, patience, and mutual effort. Days later, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find David standing there, his eyes weary but resolute. In his arms was Sophie, her small face lighting up with surprise and warmth as she saw me. Emma was noticeably absent, and I sensed that this visit was David's conscious step toward reconciliation, unmediated by the tensions that had clouded previous encounters. Sophie's laughter filled the room as we settled into the worn sofa, and for a moment, the weight of past grievances lifted. Watching her, I was reminded of the innocence that often becomes collateral damage in adult conflicts, a child caught between fractured loyalties. Once the initial warmth faded into a quiet conversation, I found the courage to speak openly with David. I told him of the loneliness I had felt, the sting of being sidelined, and the importance of recognition beyond mere obligation. I shared how his silence had felt like abandonment, how I had longed for him to stand with me rather than between us. David listened, his expression a mixture of remorse and understanding. He confessed that fear and uncertainty had held him back, that navigating the storm between his mother and wife had left him paralyzed. But now he was willing to face those fears, to prioritize family bonds over convenience and conflict. We spoke of the past without blame, focusing instead on the future we could build together. David promised to advocate for Sophie and to create a space where love and respect could flourish. It was a fragile beginning, but a beginning nonetheless. In the days that followed, David made efforts to reach out more frequently, including Sophie in family traditions and inviting me to share in her milestones. Each visit was a step toward healing, a chance to rebuild trust eroded by time and turmoil. Yet, the shadow of Emma's absence lingered. David spoke cautiously about the difficulties at home, hinting at tensions that remained unresolved. I offered support but made clear that my role was not to intervene in conflicts but to nurture the relationships rooted in honesty and respect. Our conversations deepened, moving beyond surface pleasantries to address the challenges we faced as a family. David expressed gratitude for my patience and understanding, acknowledging that rebuilding would require effort from all sides. One afternoon, as Sophie played nearby, David and I discussed boundaries, how to protect our renewed relationship from the fractures that had once threatened to undo it. We agreed on open communication and mutual respect, recognizing that love without these foundations is fragile. Through these moments, I began to see the man David was becoming, not the son caught in a web of family strife, but a father and individual seeking his own path. It was a transformation that filled me with cautious hope. I also sensed a change within myself. The bitterness that had once clouded my heart was giving way to forgiveness and acceptance. I understood that while the past could not be rewritten, the future was still ours to shape. As I watched Sophie's laughter ripple through the room, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. This relationship was not just about mending old wounds, but about creating a legacy of love and resilience for the next generation. David's visit marked a turning point, a moment where silence was broken and the possibility of healing became real. It was a reminder that even after pain and distance, family ties can be restored when met with honesty, humility, and the willingness to change. Though the journey ahead was uncertain, I embraced it with open arms, ready to walk alongside my son and granddaughter toward a future defined not by past hurts but by hope and renewal. Emma's messages arrived like cold gusts through a cracked window, resentful, sharp, and filled with thinly veiled frustration. "You think you can just step back and still be part of this family?" One text read. "This isn't how families work. You're losing control." Her words revealed more than anger. They exposed a desperation to maintain authority over a family dynamic slipping through her fingers. I read her messages with a steady heart, refusing to be drawn into the swirl of manipulation. Emma's need to control had been a constant undercurrent in the years of discord, and now it was laid bare in her attempts to unsettle the fragile peace I was building with David and Sophie. But I knew that yielding to her provocations would only entangle me further in a web of conflict that was not mine to bear. David, too, began to uncover the layers beneath Emma's bitterness. One evening, while sorting through old messages on his phone, he found exchanges between Emma and a close friend that painted a clearer picture of her controlling nature. She had been the architect of many of the tensions that fractured our family, her unwillingness to share space or compromise leaving little room for reconciliation. This revelation was painful but necessary. David confronted Emma, a conversation fraught with tension but marked by his newfound resolve to assert his own voice. He began to assert boundaries gently but firmly, signaling that the family he wanted to rebuild could not be held hostage by past grievances and manipulations. I supported David in these efforts, encouraging him to prioritize genuine connection and independence over toxic patterns. Our conversations often circled around the importance of setting limits not as barriers but as protections for our emotional well-being. I reminded him that love flourishes best where respect and honesty prevail. As David began to reclaim his life and his role as a father beyond the shadow of Emma's influence, he took practical steps to resolve custody and co-parenting arrangements. He sought legal advice, determined to establish a stable environment for Sophie, one where she could thrive free from conflict and tension. Throughout this process, I made it clear that while I would offer emotional support, I would no longer finance battles or intervene in disputes that belonged to him and Emma. It was a lesson in independence, one that David needed to learn to grow into the man and father he aspired to be. The shifts were subtle but significant. David's visits became more frequent and less burdened by the undercurrents of resentment. Sophie's laughter returned with a lightness that had been missing, a testament to the healing taking place within our circle. Yet, even as Emma's presence diminished, the scars of past conflicts remained. We spoke openly about the challenges ahead, acknowledging that rebuilding trust and family bonds requires time and patience. There were no quick fixes, only steady, deliberate steps forward. In these moments, I felt a quiet satisfaction not from triumph over adversity but from witnessing the resilience of love when nurtured with boundaries and respect. The family we were becoming was not the one I had imagined years ago, but it was real and hopeful. I also recognized the importance of teaching Sophie the values we now embraced, that love is not about control but about freedom, that respect is earned through kindness and honesty, and that family is a choice we make every day. As the seasons changed, so did our lives. Emma's influence waned, replaced by a healthier dynamic rooted in communication and mutual care. David flourished in his role as a father and son, stepping into his independence with confidence and grace. Our renewed relationship became a source of strength for all of us, a foundation from which Sophie could grow and upon which future generations might build. It was a legacy not without its challenges but rich with the promise of healing and growth. Through this journey, I learned that setting boundaries is an act of love, not rejection. It is a means of protecting oneself so that love can be given freely and received fully. And in doing so, we teach those we love the true meaning of respect and kindness. The road ahead remained long, but no longer was I walking it alone or in silence. With David and Sophie by my side, I embraced the future with an open heart and a steady spirit, ready to nurture the family we were becoming. The day David called to share the news felt like sunlight breaking through a long, gray winter. His voice was steady, filled with a quiet triumph that warmed my heart. "Mom," he said, "I've got shared custody of Sophie. Emma's influence is fading and we're finally moving forward." The words resonated deeply, not just as a legal victory but as a symbol of healing and new beginnings. Months of difficult conversations, legal battles, and emotional reckonings had culminated in this moment. David had fought to create a stable, loving environment for Sophie, one free from the shadows of control and conflict that had once dominated their lives. It was a testament to his growth as a father and as a man reclaiming his own path. Our renewed relationship blossomed cautiously but with a sincerity that felt both fragile and steadfast. Visits became part of a new rhythm, gentle routines filled with laughter, shared stories, and the comforting presence of family. David and I spoke openly about the past, not to dwell on old wounds but to understand and learn from them, building a foundation of honesty and mutual respect. Sophie, too, thrived in this environment. Her bright eyes and infectious smile became daily reminders of why these struggles mattered. Watching her grow, I saw the promise of a future shaped not by the mistakes of the past but by the love and boundaries we had worked so hard to establish. One afternoon, as Sophie and I sat together in the garden, she reached up and took my hand, her small fingers entwining with mine. "Grandma," she said softly, "I'm glad you're here." The simplicity of her words carried the weight of all the healing that had taken place. In that moment, I knew that our story was not one of loss but of legacy. Through this journey, I discovered that love is not enough on its own. It must be paired with courage, boundaries, and the willingness to let go when necessary. It is a lesson I hope to pass on to Sophie and future generations, that love is strongest when it is firm, gentle, honest, and always earned. David sought my advice as he navigated the complexities of co-parenting and custody battles, his questions revealing a man committed to doing better, to breaking cycles rather than perpetuating them. I offered guidance, resources, and unwavering support, but also insisted that he stand on his own, that financial independence was crucial to his growth and the health of his family. As he fought for his rights, David's determination paid off. The court recognized his commitment and granted shared custody, diminishing Emma's hold over their lives. This shift allowed space for healing and growth, not just for David and Sophie, but for all of us who had been caught in the crossfire. Our family, once fractured by resentment and miscommunication, began to mend. The ties between David and me strengthened, grounded in newfound respect and understanding. Sophie's presence was a constant reminder of what we were working toward, a future where love was not taken for granted but cherished and nurtured. In this quiet transformation, I found joy and purpose. The pain of rejection and estrangement was tempered by the resilience of love that refused to be extinguished. I embraced my role as grandmother with renewed vigor, determined to teach Sophie not only the meaning of love but the importance of boundaries, respect, and self-worth. Our story, still unfolding, was no longer about loss or betrayal but about the enduring power of family, the ability to rebuild, to forgive, and to grow. It was a legacy I hoped would inspire Sophie and those who came after her to understand that love is a choice, a commitment, and a gift that must be honored. As I watched Sophie chase butterflies in the late afternoon sun, I felt a profound sense of peace. The journey had been long and fraught with pain, but it had led us here to a place of strength, hope, and the promise of a healthier, more loving future. This was not just the end of a chapter but the beginning of a new story, one written with courage, kindness, and the unwavering belief that family at its best is a sanctuary of love and respect.